In a rapidly shifting society, now more than ever, it is essential to stay grounded. Balance is key, but harmony is better. Here, we provide the keys to tap into the divine masculine without sacrificing the divine feminine, because confusion not transmuted becomes confusion transferred.
This is Divine Masculine Activated, a weekly Tuesday evening tap-in brought to you by Mastermind Connect and curated by the good brothers JD Weatherspoon and Cortni Grange. We invite you to grab your activation method of choice, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and bring your whole self into this space. All right. We are back. Whew, that was a journey, y'all. Thank y'all. Sometimes technology gonna do what technology gonna do.
Computer's gonna compute.
Start this thing, computer's gonna compute. We're gonna start this thing from scratch, from the beginning, so everybody can get this good nutrition the way it was supposed to be received. So thank you all so much for joining another episode of Divine Masculine Activated. I am Cortni Grange. He is
JD Weatherspoon.
Together, we have put together this series under the Mastermind Connect Brotherhood to talk about how we define divine masculinity. And so here we define divine masculinity as the ability to activate your masculine energy without sacrificing your feminine energy. Now, this is non-binary, non-gender specific. This is relevant to energy. So whenever you find yourself in a seat, that's where you sit, right? But more so like we got here in a way, right, JD? Like we've been talking about this shit for a while, but we just bringing it to the people.
Exactly. And apparently it's going to be a really good episode because Facebook spontaneously cut our live stream, but that's fine. We're going to bounce back. We're going to bounce back. But anyway, so all of this is predicated off of our personal why, right? Our nurturing as men taught us that anything feminine is reserved for women, and masculinity is really about being hard, forceful, choosing logic over empathy, being real linear, right? We created DMA to unpack what we've been talking about masculinity and reshape how we think about femininity. Now, why should you care?
A lot of different reasons, JD. But particularly in this week's episode, we're going to be focusing on this conversation, 50 Shades of Trauma.
Yes.
And the whole point behind it was that when we were looking at like masculine and feminine energy from a perspective of like how it vibes with us, right? Mm-hmm. We were looking at the past couple of months and things that were happening, and there was just a lot of different types of trauma that we were undergoing, right? And so the trauma that came with this being a new year, but it's still being in a pandemic, right? And so we're now traumatized in a bit because it's like we thought this would be done, or I can't believe it's been a year or whatever. But nobody thought we would be in this position 24 months ago, right? And so you add that to all the personal, professional, societal traumas that we've been seeing, and it's just been a lot of different shades of this shit. And we wanted to talk about how one thing that we noticed along the way in looking at these traumas was that extreme independence was often a response. Like we would see people taking very self-serving, y'all do what y'all gonna do, we gonna do this over here type actions. Whether you look at the folks who tried to bring their crazy behinds over to DC and storm the Capitol, or you look at the fact that like just in the relationships that we're all often experiencing, there's been a lot of polarizing changes because like we ain't never seen these people this much before. And so it puts us into the conversation today, right? When we look at 50 Shades of Trauma, we're going to talk about how extreme independence can be a response to trauma and how that impacts our relationships, our friendships, and even our society. Oh my God, who would have thought about it? But no. So when we start this conversation, good brother, I think, it's best for us to start at the top, right? So before we boil it down to the self, we start from the top of the funnel, which in my opinion would be society.
Definitely. I think this is probably the most appropriate topic to start with and such. Hold on.
Let me just say guilty on all charges real quick.
Say it one more time.
Guilty on all charges, all 3 charges.
One more again.
Yeah, man. There we go.
That's amazing. Yeah. So from a societal level, you definitely touched on a lot of what we saw in a lot of the political upheaval, right? So on one side, you have the entire spark of last summer and all of the movement that came as a result of the trial that we just got the results of. This has been one hell of a loop, right? At the core, from where I sit, there's a fundamental lack of trust in the system that contains our society. Masculine polarity, right? We've seen inconsistencies. We've seen the rigidness, but we've not seen any of the flow. Seeing a whole lot of static. And that's why you've been seeing a whole bunch of noise. Like subsequently, because of said lack of trust, we've also seen like a 400% spike in like firearm purchases.
Ta-da. It's because I remember when I started to see that, right? Like, so for those that already had firearms, you were probably dealing with, we seen a lack of bullets, right? Like you couldn't get a gun and you couldn't get ammo at one point. And so
you just have to pay like 5 times the normal
the amount, which, you know what I'm saying? That's putting certain people at a disadvantage, especially like if you're talking about you in a small community, you know what I'm saying? Or just when you look at the communities that most own guns, like that was one of those knockout punches, right? A lot of people were like, yo, we can't even afford to get ammo. And so when you live in those environments on a regular, you already in a different mindset. So that escalates, right? On the other end of the spectrum, the people who either didn't have guns, just got introduced to guns, or were like, oh shit, I need a gun for the first time, that escalates. And so on every side of this, like this societal stream, like we saw it was the same thing with the toilet paper and paper towels. Like some people was like, I'm good. Other people went ham and then nobody had nothing.
If you could just calmly move in a chaotic formation, just run at the fire exit, not in a single file line, just everybody like everybody.
And while you're at it, go bring your alter ego over there with you. Like get your shadow self and bring them in your line with your ass too. So both of you can get to where you need to go.
So here's the funny thing. I think like we should probably get into more of the nitty gritty of what these trauma responses are. Like last time we talked about reacting versus responding.
Responding, yeah.
Right? It's been mostly reactive and increasingly more so with like every progressive season for real. What's going on? All right. And what I've noticed is like at the core of these traumas, like it's all fear.
Yes.
And fear makes us respond in more ways than we realize. Like we know about fight or flight.
Yeah.
But there's also like 4 different types of trauma responses that we know of for real. So take into account fight, flight, freeze, which is when a lot of people do nothing, which we saw.
That's right.
During the quarantine, when that first started to ramp up, you had some folks that chose to continue on with life as usual. And that was their way of dealing with it by kind of not dealing with it and seeing what happens.
Yep.
And then you had another one, which is called FAWN, FAWN, which I was familiar with, but never thought of as a trauma response, which is funny. I actually do this all the time. You find yourself turning into a person that makes everything okay somehow. So you become a people pleaser.
Yes, in too many different ways.
Listen, if pandering didn't win votes, people wouldn't do it every single. So
talk about it. It's Earth C. What's going on, shawty? Hey, Candace. Happy 4th to you. We are having a beautiful and blessed day. Thank you.
We really are having a blessed day. Might be a bit too blessed.
Too blessed. Talk about it. But you said something that was interesting to me, man, when you talked about the point of trust, right? Mm-hmm. Like the extreme independence being connected to how we are able or unable to trust, right? And that kind of makes me think about romantic relationships, right? So looking at how in any relationship, trust is a fundamental pillar. But more so in romantic relationships where the agreements are so specific and energetically bound, right? In a friendship, like you and your homie can get into it, but the bond of what your friendship is based on can be greater than the break that you have at this point, right?
It sounds like principle versus fluidity,
which we will get into in 1 second. So before we wrap that thing around to y'all, I'm saying it from a perspective of these romantic relationships. It's like, what happens when the relationship is built on all fluidity and no principles? That, for me, is where it seems like the lack of trust can be made, because there's no principle to it. So you're trusting emotions over anything else. How I feel about you becomes what I trust.
You don't want to build a house on it.
Not at all. It ain't gonna work that way. Nah. So in romantic relationships, right, when we look at this trauma aspect, especially when you talk about fawn, it would seem that if we looked at romantic relationships that are experiencing trauma and didn't know it, right, where there's some person being too independent in the relationship, would you say that they're experiencing fawn and just never had it identified?
Absolutely. It was identified. It was probably just identified as lying.
Yes, because that's not something that you hear on a regular basis, right? Like, even if you would go to therapy, it may be dependent if your therapist is going to get that technical with you to tell you that's what you're experiencing. They may say, like, you should work on your lying. But, you know, fundamental. What does that mean? Exactly.
Well, so for me, like, it manifested as behaviors that were often described as like manipulative. I know some people are laughing at this because it's more of you're giving the right answer out of a desire to generally just want everybody to get along for real. Like, which is one application that for me, I used to apply towards my role of setting the container, masculine energy again, working with that polarity, is to establish and maintain harmony. And then the rest was just thinking in a short-sighted manner versus thinking long-term. Well, 5 steps ahead, this actually makes a bigger mess. Oh, okay, well then I may as well go on about this in a different way. There's no point in trying to make you feel good right now. I didn't realize that would be a bigger mess. Didn't know until I knew.
Yes.
Which, depending on who you talk to, they may or may not really care about that at all. Like, that's a different type of time. It's a different type of time.
But that's that container that you mentioned brings me to like where I was going with regards to romantic relationships, because if we're talking about trust, in this case, masculinity would be creating the trust. When trust is created, that's a masculine energetic. Maintaining the trust over time would be a feminine energetic. I say that because action, moving forward, like we've been talking about, just because the lane is open doesn't mean you have to accelerate, but the acceleration itself is masculine. I often say to myself, it's like, no, I often say when I'm in conversation, like, if masculine energy is leadership, then feminine energy owns the access to that leadership. So at any given time, if there is a masculine energetic that is in front, it was allowed by its feminine energy, right? Take that in the point of a romantic relationship. If there is a masculine man leading a relationship, it is truly because that feminine woman allowed him to do so. This is why we often say men only do what we allow them to do, because it's based on the balance or the access that the feminine provides. In that case, it's a man and woman situation. But energetically, we apply it to a lot of different things, namely trust. And so when we trust the masculine to lead, what maintains that trust is the consistency of it happening over time, the feminine. That's the container and the other piece, right? JD, am I following where you were going?
Yeah, so like masculine polarity, container, feminine polarity, pretty much any and everything is out of it.
Anything that's in it. Yep. Yeah.
And that's the catch. Like, but tying this back into what we were brought on here today to talk about, like driving it home a bit, with romantic relationships, if that structure is not firmly set in place, or at least not set in place and according to the needs of whatever is inside the container. Maybe it needs to be like hard shell, you know, like Tupperware. Maybe it needs to be a safe. Maybe it needs to be a Ziploc bag. We don't actually need a lot of structure here.
It needs to be able to hold something.
And so I think the way that we match up the energy that we bring to each situation according to the needs of the situation, as opposed to what we think we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
then I think we put ourselves in a better place. So like, boom, for example, in romantic relationships, this is addressing the crowd, by the way, but also you. Being in a situation where you meet someone and you click, you feel an attraction. However, you automatically find yourself nitpicking on things.
Yes,
like,
from jump. Yeah,
exactly. How do you address that moving forward? Because automatically, the fact that you're on guard means at a certain level, you're not that comfortable. You don't trust this situation. This container feels it's not sturdy.
Something's wrong with it. Right. I thought it was going to be glass and it's plastic. Yep.
And as men, we do it too. That's our feminine polarity. I cannot lean in where she sits. If we're going to go cis here, I can only speak from this perspective, never been anything else. I can't trust in where she is in herself. Thus, I know I have to be a bit more vigilant of my energy and her.
And that is where it often, as you say, it gets tangled and twisted, right? Because both sides are operating at a frequency that's not based in harmony, right? It's based in self-preservation. It's based in extreme independence, right? Driving it all the way back home for the point.
Or projection. Yeah, projection, exactly. Right. So Shanika, boom, like that sounds like a projector. That's exactly what it is.
Yes, that's exactly that. Thank you for bringing it up, sis. We appreciate you.
Boom.
So now it brings me to the question that we wanted to pose to our audience for today, which we will also hopefully answer ourselves because, we here for the public sector as well.
Right.
But what role did you play in attracting the person, trauma, or situation? So let's look at this relevant to relationships, right? We've all experienced a relationship where it didn't quite go the way we thought it was going to go. But in those situations, it is often the most challenging to determine like what really was my shit and what was really this other person's stuff.
And what was ours.
Those
Venn diagrams overlap.
There we go. This brings us back to option C, ladies and gentlemen, as we always talk about.
Yes.
Always an option C in there that makes things more challenging. Well, for us, makes things more simple. But for a lot of people, because they don't acknowledge option C, it's only A or B, things become more rigid. So in this case, I will say for me, what role did I play in attracting? I'll go with the trauma, right? That was in a past relationship for me, not the person, not the situation, but just the trauma itself. I never took relationships seriously until I got in a serious relationship.
It's usually how it goes.
So I just never knew what the point of it was until I tried, but I didn't try until way later in life, right? So like I didn't come up looking to date when I was in high school. I think I had 1 or 2 girlfriends. And for me, that was my way of doing the right thing. Because if we just kicking it, if I don't have no girlfriend, then I'm doing right.
Circle back. That's that farm business.
That's it. You see where we're going with it?
Yeah.
Well, for me, that made sense. And it was honorable at that time. And it might even have been honorable at that time because I was 16, 17. Like, let's be real. But look at how that projects out over time, right? So we often talk about immature masculinity in relationships and all the different ways that we see that present itself. And we address a lot of how that comes from childhood trauma or relationships with your father or not seeing successful marriages or relationships or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Like imbalances with like the maternal dynamic cause just as much fractured masculine representation especially in relationships. Like that relationship to your mom. So you don't really see how trauma associated with feminine energy manifests itself until you get into relationships. Bingo. Whereas the ones with like from a masculine polarity are sort of right in your face.
Right up front. Yes.
You can see it from down the street.
That's where for me, the trauma was relevant to like, I didn't really start doing this thing until I started doing this thing. So I had built up things that I wasn't aware of that were now affecting me in what I said I wanted to do, right? What I said I wanted to feel or how I thought I could commit when really I had no idea what I wanted to commit to, right? And so for those of us that have taken these journeys of deeply connected partnerships, whether they're friendships or intimate relationships, these things start to kind of hold true, right? As we get older and we see like, to Nipsey, like circle getting smaller, everybody can't go. I've always said to myself, if you have a circle that continues to grow and it always looks the same, there's probably something about you ain't working on. Because there's no way that you can stay that level forever, right? Unless you're in a more communal society where like that level is what everyone aspires to. And that's the point.
Fluid.
But we're not there. We are in a society of individuals.
Not here. We can take that back to the E-lane. You might can get it then, but
we're not here, but you're not getting it here. So that's that interdependence thing. But now we get into like, what does that look like in these friendships? Because in relationships, we can put the acceptance that like all of our emotions are valid. And so it's going to always make sense why or why not this relationship ended. But friendships are different. They are largely emotion based, but there's these underlying things, back to what you was talking about with principles, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what makes the difference with relationships, is that they're more principle based than like trust based.
Friendship based relationships versus romantic ones.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I can see that. Now within friendship, like how would like extreme independence as a result of how you were raised play out in a friendship?
That's right.
How would that affect that fluidity?
So I would figure like if there's a reduced level of fluidity and an increased level of principle on any one side. So like, for example, you and I are in the sandbox and we're flowing and things are working well. But all of a sudden I decide, and this is taking it very, very childlike for y'all, because for me, watching my child is how I learned a lot of this. I decide we should go do something else. You see where I'm going?
I'm not ready to stop playing this game.
But you're not ready to stop playing yet.
Nah.
But we need to go play something else because that's cool. You haven't seen it the way I've seen it yet, but you're going to want to do it. You should come with me because you're my friend. Right? That's natural. There's nothing we're not supposed to hate each other for that. We do it from the most childlike, the most purest forms of friendship. We do it at that level. But as we get older, that energy of I want to go do something else becomes I want to go do something else. And here's why you're supposed to do it too. Or here's why if you don't do it, we can't be friends anymore. Or here's why your political views are so impactful to who I am. How many people had to go through that environment? Because I remember having those conversations when Trump got elected and you had households divided and people had to make some real staunch decisions about political ideologies that we know both don't care about people.
We don't all know that. Don't assume. Don't project. Listen, everybody's not ready to embrace what is. They project differently. I don't have a right to project my expectation that they should know differently.
No, I do not.
All emotions are valid.
That's
so,
right.
like COVID adjusted my friend circle based on rapid adjustment and values around what COVID safe look. That's a very good one. Mask wearers versus non-mask wearers versus pro-vaccine versus anti-vaccine.
Whole thing right there. I mean, if we could look at the masculine and feminine
trust, though, because now you have those who wear masks because they don't trust people, and you have those who don't wear masks because they don't trust people.
Because they don't trust people. This is why this stuff for us, y'all, is so interesting because, again, like when you live or you choose to exist from an option C format, it's not that you always choose option C. JD and I are probably some of the most polarized people you will ever meet if you actually know us. Like what I do is what I do. What I don't do is what I don't do. You're probably not going to choose me at this point. But in terms of how we got to those points, it's not based on a lot of things that are like ego-based or self-serving. Like we truly surrendered ourselves to the things that taught us how to be better than what we were being before. And we continue to listen to that. And over time, that told me stay over here or stay over here. So kind of how we talk about like what's leading you, what's your North Star. Those are the only polarities, ladies and gentlemen, that I care about. The rest of them are just things that I got to deal with. So I care from a perspective of my purpose, my divinity, and how that shows up in community with those that I choose to hold space with. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it changes that all of my relationships have to do that. Right?
And if it does, that may mean that you need to work on you a bit. And by work on you, I mean strengthen your container. Because if it was strong,
yeah,
it wouldn't really matter what was outside of it. You can't sink a ship unless water gets inside of it. And I think for me, that was the hardest pill to swallow. Like, oh, okay. Like, I probably do have a point, but I'm also tripping.
What was that you said last week? Am I wrong?
Or do I just
not like it? It is.
And that's all Mary had a little lamb.
That's all Mary had a little lamb. Because that part about not liking it is valid.
You're allowed to not like it.
You're allowed not to like it.
Just like it is actually not required.
No, at all. But just like in a relationship or in the balance of masculine and feminine energy, what's growing doesn't always have to like the container it's growing in.
Nope.
So if you're in an environment that's giving you the things that you need to be what you're supposed to be, but you don't like it, the acceptance or rejection of that tells a lot about where you are in terms of balance with your masculine and feminine energy.
So you mean it's a me problem?
Ooh, it ain't an us problem, I'll tell you that. I got a lot of me problems. Those are mine. The rest of y'all,
those are your socks on the floor.
Yo,
okay. So now, because we can definitely dive back into the romantic relationship piece with that one right there, because that's a smooth answer to the socks on the floor conversation.
Literally, it's a smooth answer to the socks on the floor conversation. But I think those are even interesting relationships. Well, interesting in relationships when we get into the nuance of like household principles, right?
Yeah.
Are you a laundry folded after dried person, or are you a laundry dried, dropped in a basket, sit for a couple of days, then fold type person?
And occasionally. So now my only question is like, audience, when you find that you are one and you are cohabitating with another, what do you do? What's that reaction look like in a romantic relationship? The way you're gonna deal with your baby brother is not the way that you're gonna deal with, your girlfriend.
Yes. What do you do when she leaves the cap off the toothpaste? What are you gonna do?
Squeezes from the bottom versus the top.
Or what are you gonna do when he got to shave his head, so he takes your leg razor to shave that scalp that you love so much that looks so good on him, and he leaves his head chips to sink?
Or when she takes your clippers and to use on her legs or something else.
Boy, not the T-blade though, B. Do not use my edger on.
Well, not the Andes.
Hold on? Candace said, "Do you wash your dishes before putting them in the dishwasher?" Yo, listen. Wars have been started in certain people's households over less.
Listen, just say you're from a really, really traditional household that didn't have dishwashers growing up. Or just say you're Jamaican.
And this is why you see this right here. This is the level of vulnerability we need to see more people have. Because if somebody squeezes from the bottom, they looking at you sideways. But guess what? That person that squeezes from the middle is like, I just found my tribe. God damn it, option C.
There is no spoon.
There is no spoon, baby. But this to the point, just to bring it back home to what we're talking about. So when we are in balance with our masculine and feminine energy, when we are finding harmony between things like how I feel about something and is it right or wrong, between what's legal for me to do and what I consider to be morally or immorally correct, moral or immoral in terms of my decision making.
We went back up. We're a society.
Yes, I'll take it all the way back up. All of that is when you do experience harmony with your masculine and feminine energy, one, the situations move from being urgent to just being important. That's first and foremost. Just because things are important does not mean they're urgent because you feel a way. It's still just important sometimes. But even in the case of when we look at like how that's going to flow in a relationship, romantic relationship, like there's got to be a significant level of grace, right? All across the board.
Where does that grace come from? Is it on Amazon?
I mean, a lot of the books I got were on Amazon. But no, the grace is not on Amazon. That grace comes from right in here when you are balanced and harmonious within yourself. and you say to yourself, is this person right? Or is this person trying to hurt me? The opposite end of that conversation, right? Not, am I right? Or do I not just like it?
Is this like the first thing, by the way?
First one. First and
foremost.
I'm
not wrong. They're wrong, right?
Obviously, if I don't like it, guess what's next? You. Because it can't be me. Immediately. Immediately after I determine I don't like it, 9 times out of 10, it's got to go out. It can't stay in here because I don't like it. But that's the ego doing what it's supposed to do, protecting us with our emotions.
Don't get it right, get it true.
I mean, I like it. So where we at? We got time. We jump back in on this thing. Now we just flowing, y'all, because
we really are. Listen, we're in the
tapped in. We tapped in.
20. Don't act like you don't know.
Nah, man, for real. We'll just take a quick minute to pause for the cause. So JD and I bring this podcast web series, whatever the hell this thing gonna be, bring this to you every single week on behalf of Mastermind Connect. It is a men's organization that we are a part of, a brotherhood, a circle, not a hierarchy, a circle, right? And that makes a difference. That we have found so much necessary nutrition in over the past, for me, 2 years, for JD, what, 75, 80 years?
11, for sure.
50, 11 years.
My 59th year.
And so as we've spent time in circles, not just with each other, but with our brothers in Mastermind Connect, like this is the type of conversations we're having. These are the things that our brothers are posing to us, and we're going back to ourselves and being like, damn, let me go assess, you know what I'm saying, what Manny said in that conversation, or what I saw Vargas post this week, or what Ivo did with his career. And it really does make a difference to us all trying to stay tight.
First and foremost, the stuff that Ivo does with like his eyeglass frame purchases is inspiring. That dude is dope for no reason.
You gonna be dope and dope at the same damn time.
And then, you know, have you out at a fete pre-COVID, of course. We're gonna bring it back though. So thinking of our brotherhood in particular, and that was really a good question here. How do men find harmony within their brotherhoods when the balance of masculinity and femininity is not harmonized? Short answer, we typically don't. However, I think at first glance, speaking from experience, not giving advice, realizing a lot of the stuff that we just went through, is it wrong or do I just not like it? And how is that being communicated, and how am I communicating my dislike?
Yeah.
A lot of it gets lost in like translation or the delivery. Mm-hmm. If it seems like the email to text message thread is not going well, you should probably pick up the phone. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of my biggest takeaways. Always check before I press send. Assume best intent. That's a good one. Remembering that like what they said is their business and how I perceived it as my business.
Yes. And
the two don't necessarily need to overlap unless we've decided that they do. The trick is when only one person realizes that. Like the first one that realizes that is the most unlucky bastard on earth, because
that's it.
That means you have to hold the biggest grace container.
Listen, you talking about
not to let people know how quickly I realize stuff, because then.
And let's keep it funky, right? Like we talk about grace, and especially looking at this whole extreme independence as a trauma response conversation. Let's not overlook how lonely grace can be. Right? To be the one that's giving grace is sometimes a very lonely place when you're waiting to see if that grace is going to be returned. And in that environment, which we often do have to deal with, that is a part of the process of giving grace, is the uncomfort that comes with having to give it. We can find ourselves in a moment where we are truly allowing another person to help us be interdependent, or we can choose independence. In those moments, right? The choice of interdependence is giving the grace. You do that thing. But if you allow the fear of that loneliness and it staying there too long to touch you too much, and then you take that grace back because, well, this person didn't respond fast enough, or I apologized and it took you a week to apologize. I immediately knew what I did wrong, and it took you forever to figure out what you did wrong in that relationship. Grace ain't supposed to have no time limit, y'all.
And that's where it's. I'm working on that one. We're buffering in that region.
Me too.
Now it's not.
Me too.
Like you got a cool 90 to 120 business days. You know what I'm saying? Like if all the leaves on the trees can change color and fall off in 3 months.
Let me tell you what you can do.
Let me tell you what you can do.
Let me tell you what you can do. And this again to the good sister's point around like how do we find the harmony? To be honest with you, good sister, from my perspective, as a masculine cord man who has accepted the responsibility to lead, I say I go build it. I go get funky with some feminine energy. I find things that are in the balance that I want to see. And then I start to curate around those things to make them feel safe. The safer I can make those things feel, the more they're going to pour back into me. And this isn't just a woman. I'm talking about brothers that make me feel safe, a career that makes me feel safe.
To the brotherhood. If the
a relationship, listen, a relationship with my co-parent that makes me feel safe. I create a container around that so it can grow and develop, and it makes me feel safer and safer and safer. But it's because I accept the one responsibility that I've decided to have. The rest of the shit that people think I'm supposed to do, I get to it when I get to it. So that's to your point. Like I'm loading on that part, the part about grace, because like I only got so much of it right now. And I'm already giving out a whole lot.
Listen, man, like you have to regulate the fucks that you give.
In a major way, boy.
Because if it's important, like in order to support the breadth of perpetual grace, I don't want to say endless. Grace itself is endless. I'm not.
That's right. I'm not. Nope.
I'm not. Unless you don't expect me to do anything else that day. Like if I just got to be graceful,
listen,
we can rock it out. Graceful and respond to all the emails and drink all the water and exercise and do mortgage. Nah.
You know how many 420 friendly activities I'm gonna need to give grace that much? Like, nah.
That's amazing.
Absolutely not. That's amazing.
I'm not old enough to be singing all.
Yo, we should come out. We should come out with a strand and call that joint Amazing Grace.
It makes you hum like Negro spirituals.
Listen, if you want to give grace in your life, smoke this.
If Urkel can do it, anyway. So we're back.
Yeah, come on now, but nah, hold on. Candace brought up real quick. I find it challenging to sit in that type of discomfort. However, it helps when I connect with seekers more. Okay.
What is it about that discomfort that you find challenging?
Yeah.
I know there's a bit of a lag, so we'll give you a bit of time on that.
Yeah, we'll come back on that one.
Because that's a really good question. Like, I want to think about it. How do
But this was fun, so I had to put it up here. I like it. Grace is the exit too. Yes, indeed.
Grace is oh yeah, you don't have to stay.
God, you don't have to stay. That's right.
Know. And I think that was the biggest one for me. I have no right to tell you how to be. I have every right to remove myself, or at least distance myself from a context that no longer serves me.
Yep.
And that's an act of love. I don't want to resent you.
Yeah.
I stay in no resentment.
Yeah. And that is interesting because in that space, right, that other person may feel that you chose independence over them.
And you may have. That may have been the most graceful decision that you could make.
Yeah. But that's why I think the conversation we have today is so important, because we never said independence being a trauma response was bad. We just said it happens. So none of this is good or bad. And that's the point with the masculine and feminine balance, or activating your masculine energy without sacrificing your feminine. It is the fundamental space of like, well, which one's right, which one's wrong? The answer is yes. Stick with the yeses.
Case in point, like fight traumas can be used in a positive way. Listen, I feel like that's how you get boundaries. I feel like that's part of leadership.
I mean, have you seen Fight Club? Exactly.
We can't talk about that.
Absolutely. Sorry, you're right.
We can't talk about
Let's go back.
Candace wasn't there.
I'm sorry. I'll bring this one up because Candace brought it back around. I've asked a few men what makes you feel safe in a relationship. They said that no one had ever asked them that. Damn. We have to create more spaces for them to embrace their whole ass selves. Yes.
Well, how many of us are really socialized to care about, like, I'm not talking about like functional needs, like, okay, make food and rub his back and you know what I'm saying? Like the other stuff that we say we need, but realistically, like relational support based needs in a relationship. Like most of us are not acculturated to think of men in that way.
True story.
And that includes women.
True story.
Yeah, like think about it. I feel like any man who tries to express that or historically has tried to, simply because so many people have not had a frame of reference for it, the noise of people who are enculturated to hear a man explaining emotional needs as complaining, and no one is not, let me not say no one, that's hyperbole, let me chill. Many of us are not enculturated to tolerant of men expressing needs emotionally.
Yeah, we don't know how to listen. We have not been taught how to effectively listen to when the masculine is speaking, when it's emoting, when it's putting out anything of what it truly divinely is. We're not really trained as a society for that. Technically, we're not really trained for femininity to do it either, because again, if there's an imbalance on one, there's an imbalance on the other. So we're trained to be more supportive of everyone's emotions, but we're not trained to hold people accountable. This energy starts to rise up. If we're trained to hold people completely accountable, but not give them any grace towards come what may, this one may start to rise up. But it takes a consistent desire to balance it. It's not like it just happens. Like, it ain't like every conversation just works because I've said that I balance my masculine and feminine energy. It ain't like every time I'm in a relationship and I'm trying to have an important conversation, I don't mess up what I'm trying to say because, God damn it, I'm angry. And because I'm angry, I'm sad. Shit. And that's all I got right now.
And at the core of both of those is just really fear.
It's just fear. Right. But I don't act. For me, it's not about acting like those things don't happen. It's about letting people know that's the only way to figure out when it's happening. When you acknowledge it in those moments, you accept it, you surrender to it, and you don't act like it's what it's not. Again, is this wrong or do I just not like this? All right. The homie K-Dot coming through. Hold on. Most men aren't tuned in with themselves enough to even care about how, what, or why to even think about his emotional needs, which have been engraved in them as a weakness. Whew. Indeed. Yes. And I wouldn't say that like I disagree, but I would say that perspective is coming from a lens of perception, like all of these things, right? But it takes into account what we know, but it doesn't take into account what we don't know. So it's lacking a bit of grace for me, simply because it's like, well, yeah, that sounds real good on the phone there for you, but like, what he say about it? I know a lot of brothers that...
Say that again in different words.
Yeah, all right. I know a lot of people that say most men don't, right? They don't know about this. But my mindset is like, when's the last time you asked a man? And when was the last time you asked a man that actually trusts you enough to give you the answer? Because most of us are very principled creatures. So just because you ask don't mean you deserve to know.
And just because you ask don't mean you actually want to know. Because just as many people they're not interested in the answer. That's like the diversity, equity, and inclusion training workshop at your big tech company. Like, they care, but they don't care. And even if they care because they don't have a frame of reference for what to do with it.
Let me I'll package it this way. They care not because it's right. They care because it impacts their bottom line. And as soon as you remove the necessity for things to be done based on what is most right for everyone, you put it in a box where you can then massage it into whatever you need it to be, right? So in diversity and inclusion part that often gets removed from the conversation is intersectionality. Like, not just diversity of culture, not just diversity of skin complexion, but like the fact that I'm 5'11" and this person is 5'6", or I weigh 120 pounds and this person weighs 200 pounds, and the level of bias and disharmony and judgment that we provide to each other on those pieces, the same way we do things like race and gender. So for me, that's where I just say that because I work in that arena, and it's always like, yo, y'all are doing it. Y'all just ain't looking in the right spot. Like, it's not about that. It's about a totally different thing, but that's the hard part to get through because they have also decided that they would rather be right.
Which, in and of itself, is a trauma response. But that's just the ego trying to protect itself because that's what it does.
Ooh, good one. See, and this is why we bang with the brotherhood, because all of a sudden the brotherhood will come through with something like this. Mastermind Connect says, inventorying the situations and people in your life that bring you anxiety, worry, and especially resentment. How many are things you can control? How many are things where you are carrying too much? For the one you can't control, what would it look like to start practicing healthy detachment?
Someone's read Untethered Soul.
Yo, this is why we bang with the brotherhood, y'all, because you hear us come and talk about this, but these are the type of questions we are faced with. It's like,
those are Wednesday afternoon posts.
That's it, man. Catch us on the camping trip, man. If you tap into Mastermind Connect, you catch us on a camping trip, you might get questions like this. All
those
right,
are spiritual experience.
Let's break this down. How many are things you can control? I think control is very relative, right? Like, you can't control something until you know you can control it. That often takes it whooping your ass a few times first, right? In most situations where something does require control, it took you removing your fear, right? Accepting the pain that's going to come with now, like, you don't know what's going to happen and you know it's probably going to hurt, and then getting past that point. And now you have not necessarily a control over it, but you have an understanding of it that can eventually lead you to be able to control it. So that's first. How many are things where you are carrying too much? In my opinion, everything. We're carrying way too much in our society, so ain't nobody not carrying too much, right? I don't think there is a person out here that does not have too much on their plate. Hard stop. Whether you think that they are the richest, most comfortable person, or you think that they are the person struggling the most, everybody's carrying something.
Back to that whole pain and discomfort are relative. Like, discomfort is discomfort.
It is.
We can talk levels of intensity, but one person may feel like another person's 100, which may feel completely like light to someone else.
Yeah. So the last part, for the ones you can't control, what would it look like to start practicing healthy detachment? Personally, I do not believe there is anything in my universe that is outside of my control. I believe that there are things that I can't control, but that shit ain't got nothing to do with me, because I can't control it. So why am I worried about it? So it's not in my universe. It may affect my universe, but I already have to accept that. So that's the first part, is like accepting the things you can't control. Like it says, you got to accept the things you can't control, but you also need the wisdom to know the difference. Because a lot of times we think we can control things that we cannot. We think because we've been made aware of our childhood traumas that we can now somehow surpass them. We don't realize that they turn into parts of us.
They are parts of us.
Exactly. They turn into parts of us as soon as they happen. So just because you realize that the way that your daddy talked to your mama you didn't like, doesn't mean that the time that was going on, it didn't ingrain certain things in you that made you the person you are today that you actually do like. So back to extreme independence necessarily being a trauma response. You can't take a certain level of authoritative communication because of how it makes you feel, even though it might be right.
You take yourself with you everywhere you go.
Talk about it. You can't take too much emotional conversation because it short circuits your ability to see the lines and the dots and like put everything in order and organize it.
Well, that's purely so you can protect yourself. Egoistic.
Still that extreme independence being a trauma response. So on both sides of the equation, whether you're being overly masculine, aggressive, loud, whatever you want to call it, and the feminine is responses to retreat, or feminine
be passive aggressive,
or be passive aggressive, which is a form of retreat because you're not engaging, right? You're kind of
reflecting.
I didn't, my hands are off of it. But it's like, no, nigga, you did that. Or from the feminine perspective, the feminine polarity, you're engaging in a conversation that's so emotional that people can't figure out what you're trying to say. They can't determine if they need to help you, hug you, leave you, because you haven't said anything that actually makes sense. You're just talking about how you feel. And this person's trying to be patient and listen and hear what you're saying, but
there are no dots to connect.
There's no dots to connect.
It's a whole bunch of wire, and it's tangled.
Right. And so on both sides, you're dealing with a bunch of wires that are getting crossed, and people are tripping. So that's how I would answer the last part, right? If you can't control it, you shouldn't be worried about trying to find healthy habits for it, because you need to be worrying about accepting it. It's never going to feel good that you can't control that thing. Move on.
And it doesn't have to, by the way.
It was never designed to. That's why it's there. That's literally the point of how you act. Man, the whole point of all of this in terms of defining yourself and becoming comfortable and knowing who you are is so that you can also know who and what you aren't. So when you come into those things, you then choose how they affect you, right? I'm a Black man living in America. Do I fear for my safety at certain times? Absolutely. Did my fear of my safety go anywhere because of this verdict? Absolutely not. Am I still proud of this moment? Absolutely. Polarities upon polarities upon polarities. We exist in them every single day. That's why we're here. But that's why we hold the space for y'all, to have this conversation so people can see more of the masculine and feminine things that are going on that you ain't really got to get that hype about. Just go live, love. I'm good. Enjoy.
And that's when Mary had a little laugh.
One more again.
But no, truly, I mean, to sum all of it up, ultimately, this is all just a game.
That's right.
What role do you wish to play? Mm. But the remote control is in your hand, like Ready Player One.
Very much.
It's happening right now. You can decide whether or not you want to be in it, or whether what is that we always say, mechanics versus metaphors?
That's it. Oh, mechanisms versus metaphors.
Mechanisms versus metaphors. There we go. Like, are you the graphics? Are you the CGI? Are you what people think that they see? Or are you the player behind it, pushing the buttons, making things go?
Actually making it go. Right. Shout out Lupe Fiasco for that one.
Shout out for that one.
So grounding us before we take off, before we let y'all go along your merry ways, enjoy this 420 Taco Tuesday. We want to just first and foremost say, man, take a moment, if you haven't already, to like, share, whatever these social media construct things are. If you enjoy this conversation, subscribe. If you enjoy this conversation, if you feel like more people need to be involved in it, help us make that happen. We're two people. We do the best we can with this, but please believe me, we are not some viral chasing individuals. I do not have the time to put that in. I do have the time to focus on what I know and allow my community to take me as far as I'm supposed to go, right? And so this platform, this whole conversation, we built it, like we said, for y'all, so that we can take it to a place where you all see the things that you want to be talked about. So again, like, share, comment, let a sister, let a brother know about this post. Bring your child, bring your cousin, bring your uncle. Let them hear this conversation and jump in with us. Most importantly, sorry, go ahead, brother.
No, land your plane.
Most importantly, when we leave here upon this glorious day, Method Man and Red Man are gonna have some fun in the verses.
Which means we're gonna have some fun watching the verses.
I haven't been this excited for verses in a while, and I don't know if it's just because I'm a hip hop head to that degree. So this is a different one, but like,
and for me,
it's perfect.
Watch how high afterwards.
Oh, watch it during. Put it on silent and watch it. Do some real JD type shit. I'm not even gonna hold y'all, bro. Yes, the kid.
Random challenge. I want people to pose these questions, have these conversations, and then I want them to share in whatever manner they deem fit, whether it's via Medium, whether it's on the Book of Faces, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's an IG Live. I don't care. Get it out. because that's how we get the wisdom of the crowd, truly, as opposed to living in the hyperbole-based spaces that we all pretty much like to lean on when we are forced to initiate these conversations.
Absolutely, yeah. And by chance you want us to be involved in that conversation, just tag us. We'll jump in. We are real people. We about this life. So with that said, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for another episode of Divine Masculine Activated. We will be back next week, Tuesday, 7 p.m. Do we know what next week's episode is?
Do we? We can find out.
We'll see what we're talking about next week real quick.
Give y'all what we're talking about next week. We're going to get
literally jumping on this joint. Ooh. Oh, yeah. Next week's episode is Let's Talk About Sex, the Tantric edition.
Ooh.
Yes. We have the good goddess homie, Crystal Tantric Yogi coming through. If you caught us last season when we talked about sex, this season we're going to be focused all on the masculine and feminine polarities of Tantra in sex.
It's going to be a very stimulating and healing experience. I recommend you bring your finest set of waist beads and coconut oil.
All your essential oils.
Light your incense. It's going to be a
listen, pull your goddess cards. Bring all that up in here.
Bring the macaroon that day.
Bring that macaroon. And make sure you got your phone on a stable platform because you might just fall off the side of the bed.
And with that being said, we're going to get on about your way because now we're just talking foolishness.
Peace and love, y'all. We'll see y'all next week.
Ooh, y'all be groovy.